Bluetooth mode paired.
Just a little microphone test. Oh, there we go. It is working. Nice and loud. New speakers in the ceiling. It's helping. All right. Okay. We're right to get in the way. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for making your way over this evening. Find a seat. As you well know, this session we really wanted to give some information that was going to be worthwhile, particularly for contractors. And in the past we've talked about the technical side of waterproofing, and this one was more about the protecting your business from a risk mitigation perspective. So we've got a good lineup of speakers today, so we're quite excited to have them present today. So just a bit of a quick introduction. Our first speaker is Rowan Altinawi.
That's great.
Good, thank you. Rowan works at BINAR, and Kamal Cassis is on the New South Wales committee, AIW committee. We thought it would be a good opportunity. Thanks. Kamal suggested it would be a great opportunity for you to present. We're trying to encourage young people into the industry and giving them an opportunity to come and tell us about their experience. So, Rowan, you're a site engineer cadet. You've studied a diploma of building design management, doing architecture at the moment, so been busy with studies,
yes,
mixing it in with some work experience, under some good leadership with the BINAR team. So we're quite excited to hear what you have to share with us today. So over to you.
Thank you. Hello everyone, good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for Kamal, George and David. Today I'll be sharing with you guys about quality control, wet area waterproofing, and I'll be sharing it from a head contractor's perspective. It's going to be procedure and risks. We're going to go through design process as well, and we're going to leave room for questions and discussions as well. So, wet area waterproofing. Okay, standards and risks. So we're going to start with what everyone's scared about. Wet area waterproofing is high risk and has potential to become problematic post-construction. So with wet area waterproofing, we are mitigating the risks of places like bathrooms, kitchens and laundries from water leakages. So in that structure, sorry, one second, just starting to get nervous. So wet area waterproofing failures can lead to water ingress, corrosion, impact on health and amenities, and ultimately requires costly repairs. So this is what we're trying to avoid as builders and as contractors as well. Obviously all of work needs to be meeting your NCC and your Australian standards. So making sure all works are compliant with the NCC, Australian standards, and your design, your waterproofing design as well. So we're going to start with the design process. So very first step, these are your early 7 steps. So making sure that your everything is correct from early stages to avoid failure in the waterproofing system, and obviously to avoid warranty issues, legal issues, and any reworks. So starting with architectural design concept, your number 2 would be suitable product selection, 3, early waterproofing consultant engagement, and reviewing any critical areas such as step downs, hops, water stops, and linear drains. Your number 5 would be performance solution requirements, if applicable, and 6, finalization of product selection, taking into consideration of product compatibilities regarding substrate, wall sheeting, and tiling. And finally, 7, architect declared design. This is when your architect declares and gives you the green tick to start work on site. So compatibility, the head contractor ensures compatibility with the membrane product in order to prevent issues like blistering, bubbles, and delamination. So you're going to start with your substrate, water stop angles, floor waste, primer, bond breakers, fillets, reinforcing bandages, and even your overlay, so example tiles and floor finishes. So making sure all of these steps are in order, you're making sure everything is getting installed correctly and up to standards. And obviously you're going to go into your verification. So this is where we verify all of our steps. Verification is achieved using an internal quality system known as ITPs. Inspection test planning, taking into consideration the following but not limited to. So site address, type of subfloor tested, visual substrate inspection, location of testing, time and date of testing, so a timestamp photo is sufficient, and your visual inspection is signed off, hold points signed off, and third-party inspection is completed. So you're going to record all of this data, and you're going to keep it safe. So if that's through your Procore or Aconex or whatever you guys use. Also, this is just a moisture test for those who don't know what moisture test is and haven't seen one before. I'm sure you guys all have. But just making sure that you keep record of the type of moisture test you're also using, and making sure that you're using the correct one in order to get accurate, your accurate readings. Very nervous. Then you've got your pre-membrane inspection protocols. So prior to membrane application, the waterproofer, that's you guys, and us, the head contractors, must inspect and approve all substrates. So that's going into your units, making sure everything is clean, your falls are correct, no dust, no rubbish, and then you should include the inspection of clean surfaces as well as falls and concrete substrates. So you're going to go in, you're going to do your falls, correct falls, you're going to do your moisture testing, and make sure that everything is clean so the waterproofers can start priming. So before the membrane is applied, all subcontractors will use a moisture content device. Again, this is the device to ensure the surface is ready to apply with primer. I've already went through this one. So step-by-step membrane installation process. So this is in the standards. So you've got number 1 and 2, that's your substrate and substrate primer. Again, making sure that you've got a clean surface and your substrates are ready. Okay, your substrates are ready. No, not this one. Here we go. Your substrates are ready. Then you've got your junction, concreter, sealant, and bond breaker. So this part, you're going to do a few things. So the first step is preparing the surface where the membrane will go. This might be concrete, plywood, or wall sheeting, or wall board, sorry. So the surface must be clean, dry, and smooth, because all the dust and moisture will make membrane fail, and that's due to blistering, delamination again, and it might not stick in. So your surface might not stick into the primer or the membrane. So think about it like painting a wall. You wouldn't paint over damp walls or wet patches because obviously it wouldn't stick in. It's the same idea here, but just with much better and bigger consequences. And then you've got your applying the membrane coat. So your membrane will go into 2 coats. The first coat will be to bond will act like a surface, and to bond the membrane with the surface, with the primer. And your second coat will act like a seamless layer of waterproofing. So this is going to be for toughness and thickness as well. Again, to avoid pinholes or any weak spots. So making sure that no weak spots or pinholes are in your second coat. And if needed, then you do patches to correct that. Otherwise, you just might have to rip up the whole thing and start over again, which we don't want to do that. And your test coverage and thickness and flood testing. So after you apply your two coat of membrane, you need to check the thickness, and this is when the third party comes in to check everything is up to standards, and it's just that extra security, as well as filling the area with water for 24 to 48 hours to ensure there's no leaks. Quality control and documentation procedure. So this is also table D1 suggested installation checklist. This is also from the standards. It's very important that we are using a checklist and a process to ensure that nothing is missed, especially for the juniors. I myself got one, and make sure that I'm doing everything as we go, ticking everything as we go as well. So the QC system involves staged inspections to assist the head contractor on ensuring the correct procedure and applications are followed. So your 6 steps here are substrate inspection, primer, caulking, and water stops. First membrane coat, and your second and final membrane coat. Then you've got coverage and thickness testing, and then lastly your flood testing. Each stage should be documented with photos, and once complete, the documentation should be stored in a project management system where it's kept safe. And best practice involves engagement with a third party waterproofing specialist, like waterproofing integrity, and undertaking any quality audits to ensure that quality audits are correct. So in summary, you're going to design, you're going to install, test and measure, record keep, and make sure that warranties, installation and materials are used to design. And that's about it.
Well done, Rowan. It was very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, very good presentation. Thank you. Very informative. I think what you demonstrated is the industry is picking up. I think with the benefit of people like Binar, construction manager, Kamal driving that in the business. It's really good to see. But I think we've got this level of knowledge from yourself, where a lot of builders don't actually have that knowledge still. So I think it's a round of applause again. I think for your skill, for your knowledge, and good positive signs for the industry. I think so. That's wonderful.
A microphone down the back here, and I just want to see if anyone had any questions. No questions?
I saw some people taking photos, so surely there must be a question or two.
Yes, anyone at all? Okay, I actually don't have any questions myself. I felt like it was a really well-rounded presentation. I feel like you're on top of it more than 99% of others in their first, not only first year, but probably first 5 years, really. So great little intro onto quality and waterproofing systems and those 5 things, especially those last 5 there. I think if everyone can go and get those tattooed somewhere on their body, they'd be doing very well. So thank you very much again, everyone.
That moisture meter.
Yep.
What is that? Where do you get it from?
Where do we get it from?
Yeah. What type is it? This?
Well, this is not the one that I wanted to get with me, to be honest. I forgot mine in the office. But the one that we're using at the moment on site is CMX 5. So that's because of the membrane that we're using, the system we're using suggests CMX 4 and above. So we've got the 5, so we just went above and beyond it a little bit, and we got the CMX 5. CMX 5 uses 6.9, so the limit of the moisture test is 6.9. And the membrane and the system that we're using at the moment at the site that I'm working at has to be below 10%. So anything below 10%, again, just depends on the system that you're using. But for this one, I think David or George gave it to me to show you guys for today. So anyone wants to...
I can probably talk to that one for a moment, and Wayne, you'll probably be interested. So that one is one that we use more so for remedial investigations. So it's got a few things. You can attach a probe, which you can drive into plasterboard or FC sheet or even timber in the bottom of it. It also has a capacitance version on the back there, which is sort of similar to what the Tremex meters do, but you can calibrate it to different points in the wall. So yeah, it's really focused around that remedial data collection and diagnostic investigation.
Yeah, that's what he said.
Any other questions, guys? Nope. Okay.
Thank you very
much.
Well done, Ryan. That's very
Okay,
good.
great. Oh, good. Thank you. I'm just going to disconnect, yeah?
Yes, thanks. Okay, I'll introduce our our next speaker. Our next speaker is our keynote speaker. We'll give Maddie a second to come up and connect. So I'll quickly introduce Maddie. Maddie Manasouridis is a building, construction and compliance lawyer. And she has given David and myself a bit of a sneak preview of the presentation last week. I know that she's put a lot of effort into it, and we really appreciate her time and commitment to giving us this presentation today. I guess, Maddie, you've been working as in the legal field of construction now for quite a while. Prior to that, you were working with Standards Australia, so
I was, yeah.
you understand standards quite well.
Is this working?
Testing 1, 2, 3. I might be too close. I'll stand back.
Plug this in, right?
Yeah.
Working? Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
working now.
But just as a lead in, so you've got experience with the NCC,
That's
you've got
right.
the Standards Australia,
Yeah.
of course.
Yes.
Now you're working at Bardia Perry.
I am.
And we're sort of over to you. And
Okay.
yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, great. So as George mentioned, prior to my private practice experience, I was working on a number of mandated standards in the NCC, including but not limited to AS 3740, which was published in 2021. So don't throw tomatoes at me. Oh, okay, what's happening here? Oh, okay, good. Okay, so just to let you know what I'm going to be talking about today, it is focused on contractual issues and noting the breadth of issues that can arise from contract. It really is a nutshell, because we could be here for 2 weeks talking about everything that can arise under a contract. So basically, I will very briefly at the end of this talk about other sources of liability, because there are obviously sources of liability arising from the contract, but there are also other sources of liability, which I'll just briefly mention at the end, because once again, we could spend days talking about it. I'll go on to talk about the key provisions in contracts. Contracts are so large, complex, etc., but there are certain key provisions that are high risk that you need to know about. And then I will go on to talk about strategies to address those high risk issues. Now, this is a disclaimer that we put in all our presentations, but in particular for this one, because of the fact that contracts are so different and small details in a contract can make all the difference depending on the factual circumstances, this is very important to note that, you know, if you do some advice for one contract will not be sound advice for another contract. So this is very important. You obviously need to balance the, you know, nature of the dispute, etc., with the cost of seeking advice, but you have to understand that certain advice won't suit your needs. Okay, so I guess a general overview of reading a contract. What are the really important issues to note when you're reading a contract? The contract particulars. So a lot of the time I'll get a contract and my client will say, here, review this contract. I can do that, that's fine. But if the contract particulars are not there, there can be, I can't fully review a contract until I know what the contract particulars are. For example, contacts. Contacts, it sounds like such a minor thing, extremely important for things like service of notices, claims for variations, claims for extensions of time. These are the main things. Claims are the main issues that we see disputes over. The site. Sometimes the boundaries of the site can be extremely important. The rate for liquidated damages. When is practical completion supposed to occur? These types of things, extremely important. They're all in the contract particulars. If you're looking at a standard form contract, they'll be in Annexure A of the contract, but they could be in all different kind of places depending on the nature of the contract. Reference documents, once again, very, very important. They're given force by the contractual provisions themselves, but what's attached to the contract can make all the difference, such as scope of works. Scope of works will be a recurring theme throughout this presentation, very important. Specifications, drawings, plans and details. Rohan mentioned building in accordance with your design. It's essential. It is a part of the contract, and failure to build in accordance with those drawings, plans, details will be a defect. Principals, projects, requirements, once again. It all has to be aligned. We'll talk about discrepancies later. Terms and definitions. We can see a word in a contract, and that word has an ordinary English meaning, but in the contract has a very specific meaning, and we must be aware of what that meaning is. Also with defined terms, which are very, very important, the way they're indicated. They might be bolded, they might be italicised, they may be in capitals. Special conditions and contract departures. Another issue we see often where a contract has been negotiated, one party says the contractual departures are included, another one says no. How do we make it clear whether they're included or not? And also remembering to look at the special conditions or contractual departures. Some people look at the contract, they don't go to the annexure with the special conditions, and you miss out on some very important information. Now, when I was having my discussions with George and David before this, we acknowledged how hard it is to negotiate subcontracts especially. Now, for example, BINA as a main contractor, they have to negotiate with a principal and upstream party. I would argue that a main contractor has more pull or more weight with a principal than a subcontractor has with a main contractor. And it's very hard when you want the job, you are trying to make a relationship with the main contractor potentially. It's very hard to stand your ground on a lot of the things we're going to talk about. But my advice regarding negotiating a contract, stand your ground on those red flags. Ask questions. It's a positive thing. The main contractor, I think the main contractor will view you in a positive light if you ask intelligent questions. You stand your ground. You say, well, I want to ask this question because I don't want us falling into dispute, which is going to affect the whole project. And that demonstrates excellence and commitments to the completion of a project, which is a positive thing, even though it feels like you're being a bother when you're doing it. It's a positive. Would you agree, Kamal? Yeah. And as I said, that pre-contractual diligence will help the project to be completed. It will avoid disputes upstream and downstream. An upstream dispute often turns into a downstream dispute. So this pre-contractual diligence helps those disputes to be reduced at least. Okay. Now, the way I'm going through this is not necessarily from the most important to the least important. What I'm going to do is focus more on things that happen towards the beginning of the contract, towards the end. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is performance security. Often in a subcontract, I don't know, show of hands, who ordinarily provides bank guarantees and who provides retention? Often in a subcontract, it tends to be more retention. It's in a way easier to provide. Because with a bank guarantee, you obviously have to go get that line of credit from the bank. A key point that comes up is the right for an upstream party to have recourse to retention, which means when they take your retention. So some issues to note is things like notice around having recourse to retention, the justification or the reasons behind having recourse to retention, and the assumption or allocation of risk. So, and I'll go through the strategies to address these issues in the next slide. Top up after recourse. After an upstream party has recourse to your security, you may need to top up your security. And then finally, release. Preconditions to the release of security and things like deeds of release. So we are talking about subcontracts here, so generally, look, a lot of subcontracts give you the option, do you want to provide us with a bank guarantee or do you want to provide us with retention? It's up to you to look at your business and say how you want to provide security. And once again, if the upstream party is asking for a form of security that is not comfortable for you, you should stand your ground, depending on the level of risk associated with that. Now, we talk about bona fide claims in terms of having recourse to security. A lot of contracts will say something like, look, a lot of contracts have very broad rights to recourse to security where it says, if so-and-so, if the main contractor has a claim against you, they can have recourse to security. It's a very broad right. But a lot of, like the standard form contracts, will talk about bona fide claims. Bona fide claims are claims that are arguable in a court, okay? So it can't just be, oh, I say there are these defects and that's why I'm having recourse to security. It has to be more than that. It has to be arguable in a court. Now, a lot of contracts nowadays, more and more, are having recourse clauses that do not have any requirement for notice. The standard forms will have something like 5 days notice for recourse to security. That means it gives you an opportunity to object to it. Worst case scenario, you can try to obtain injunctive relief, which means going to the court and getting the court to stop the person who's going to call on your security from calling on it. Now, that's more common with a bank guarantee, and that injunction can affect a financial institution that's issued the bank guarantee, but it also can affect retention money as well. So notice, very, very important. If there's no notice requirement to have recourse to security, it's a big problem. They must have to give you notice so you have a chance to do something in those 5 days. Understanding preconditions to release of security. So ordinarily, in most projects, there will be 50% release of security held at the practical completion stage, and then there will be the other 50%, or reducing by 100%, at the final completion stage. A lot of rights to release are, depend upon the provision of something like a deed of release. Now, a deed of release is a very sneaky document that's often annexed to a contract, and a lot of deeds of release will, for anyone that doesn't know what a release is it is what it sounds like it is, but in legal terms, it means you're ordinarily releasing the upstream party from any claim you may have, payment. Ordinarily what it says is, okay, we're holding $100,000 of security for you. We're going to release 50% now, and you warrant by way of this deed that we only owe you $50,000 after this. You're saying they don't owe you anything else. And depending on the factual circumstances, it can be a bit of a dangerous document, because you have to really understand, do you have any further claims against the upstream party? Do you have outstanding extensions of time claims, variation claims, anything like that? Have you been underpaid? The value of the works, etc., depending on the contract. So deeds of release are a tricky thing that you have to be conscious of. The next big issue, and this is one of the 2 key issues that we have the most disputes about, and that's variations. So first thing is the importance of the definition of variation. It differs from contract to contract. Sometimes they're very broad, other times they're extremely constrained, what the definition of variation is. Scope of works. You'll see scope of works come up constantly in this presentation. Your scope of works is extremely important for clarity around what you are being paid to do. You quote your job, it's that scope of works. And if your scope of works is not clear, or it's too broad, or it's open to interpretation, you will have problems with variations, because the upstream party will tell you, well, you were supposed to do this, and you said, well, no, that doesn't include this, but your scope of works is not clear. The reason I have exclusions highlighted is because inclusions are a funny thing. They're quite open to interpretation, and they can be quite broad, whereas specific exclusions of what you are not including in the quote must be very clear, and they can be very clear, whereas inclusions are a bit more broad. So exclusions are a big thing. And I'll tell you an argument that doesn't fly, which a lot of people try to make, is that anything that's not expressly included in a quote is excluded. It's a very poor argument, and I can't tell you how many people try to make it. If there are a list of inclusions, I actually don't support list of inclusions. All I care about is exclusions, because there are so many fights about, oh, if it's not included, it's excluded. No, it doesn't work. So be very careful about your exclusions. This all relates to your quote and tender, what's in your quote and tender. Have your quote and your tender been incorporated into the contract? Are they contract documents, or are they just some other thing that you use to get the job and then you sign the contract? It's a very important point. A lot of people assume, and look, I will say as well, if an issue does fall into dispute, we can say, well, pre-contractual negotiations, we can make arguments about that, but that's an uphill argument. So if your quote's very important to you, if your tender's very important to you, get it included in the contract and make sure it aligns with other things. Claiming variations. once again, I've done hundreds of adjudications. The biggest thing we're fighting about is variations. How they haven't been claimed properly, okay? What's the contractual mechanism for claiming a variation? There will be some type of a notice requirement. There will be a time period requirement. Things like referencing the variation clause. That could be a requirement of a valid notice. I've never seen a variation provision that didn't require writing. It should always be in writing. And sometimes there's a prescribed form. So depending on your project, you may have a series of templates or something like that where you have to actually use a prescribed form for it to be a valid notice. Time bars. A lot of the time you'll see that if you don't make a claim within 7 days or 5 days, whatever it might be, the contract says you're barred from claiming, okay? Now, that issue is not insurmountable, but it just creates an argument that you don't need to have, okay? Some strategies to deal with these issues in respect of the scope of works. Proper specification of the scope of works. You should know what the scope of works are for interacting trades. This avoids an issue where you thought someone else was doing something, the upstream party thought someone else was doing or thought you were doing it. Get the scope of works for the interacting trades. It benefits everyone. It shouldn't be, some upstream parties might resist it, but really to get the project done, it's actually a positive, I think it's a positive thing. And I don't see a barrier to it being provided. For you to understand, well, I reviewed this other trade and there's a gap here because we've excluded so-and-so and then this trade's not doing it. We would have expected this trade to do it. Discrepancies. Everything I'm talking about is related to where there's an issue with exclusions, inclusions, misalignment with things like quote, principles, project requirements, or whatever it might be, where there's a misalignment between contract documents, not things that are not in the document, sorry, not in the contract, but when there is a discrepancy between contract documents. Most contracts have a provision to say that the upstream party must be notified of the discrepancy, and what contracts should say from all your point of view is that if there is a true discrepancy, then the upstream party should direct how to resolve the discrepancy, and the downstream party should be compensated based on whether or not further costs are incurred because of that direction. So discrepancies is a big thing. You must make sure that you notify of any discrepancies across contract documents. It happens all the time because you're talking about documents that have been developed by different people, and so there is likely to be some kind of misalignment. Matrix of responsibility. This is something that can be a tool to develop based on all the scopes of works for the interacting trades. Okay, this is matrix of responsibility is something I highly recommend it. It might be something that's too onerous for a lot of people, but it's best practice, I would say. Now, some strategies to deal with the issues of variations. Understand the definition of a variation. Understand your scope of work and everything we've talked about, so you understand, is this a variation or not? Have I included this in my quote? Am I already being paid for this? One of the biggest arguments. Here's my claim for variation. No, that's actually part of your contract works. The biggest fight that we have. You have to show, no, it's not part of my contract works because it's here in my list of exclusions. Claiming variations. Follow the contract. Know your contract. Even if a lawyer hasn't reviewed your contract and provided you advice, read your contract. And I know that sounds basic, but a lot of people are not doing it. Read your contract and know the provisions of your contract. And even if the other party is not following the contract, you follow the contract. So, because it often happens, and once again, there are arguments to be made if it falls into dispute. But when the parties do not follow the contract, we have to make all types of fancy arguments to say, oh, well, this is what the parties were doing and they agreed to it. It's an argument you don't need to have. No verbal directions. Everything in writing. Everything in writing. Everything documented. Authorised personnel versus unauthorised personnel. Who are you taking your directions from? Who's telling you to go ahead with work? Is it a site foreman? Well, is that site foreman authorised under the contract to give you a direction, or do you need to be given a direction by the superintendent or a project manager? You know, most contracts will have a person nominated in the contract to say, this is the representative of the upstream party, whether it be a super or whether it be a PM, whatever it might be. Once again, everything in writing. David, I don't know if you want me to stop in each time for questions or?
That's at the end, I think.
Yes, okay, fine. The next point, time and progress. Everything's about time and money in building. We all know this. One of the issues, programming, delay, qualifying causes and compensable causes of delay. Now I'm using these terms and I'm not sure if everyone's heard those terms. These terms are the terms used by our Australian standard form contracts. A qualifying cause of delay is a delay or is a cause of delay which entitles the downstream party to an extension of time, usually to the date of practical completion. A compensable cause of delay is a cause of delay that entitles the downstream party to delay costs, okay? And not every contract has that in it. All contracts should have causes of delay that entitle the downstream party to an extension of time, which I'm going to call an EOT from now on. Now, EOTs, very similar to EOT claims, very similar to variation claims, you need to follow the contract. There are contractual mechanisms, once again, reference to clause, writing, a form of EOT, and time bars.
Could you just say extension of time, just in case they didn't get the...
Sorry?
Can you say extension?
Extension of time?
Yeah, just in case they didn't understand EOT.
Oh, okay, okay. I'm going to call an extension of time EOT from now on, if everyone, yeah. Yeah, so, and then liquidated damages. What are liquidated damages? Liquidated damages is compensation for delay, which is payable to the upstream party. So for example, if you have to finish in a month and you take 2 months, well, the second month, very simply put, you owe the upstream party a month of liquidated damages at a certain agreed rate. Now, the reason why we call them liquidated damages is because when we talk about liquidated damages or claims in the law, it means that we can ascertain the amount. Unliquidated damages or unliquidated claims means we have to do something to ascertain the amount of the damages or the claim. So what you'll ordinarily see, and this is probably not news to anyone, you'll see a daily rate. Sometimes you see a weekly rate, it's less common. You'll see a daily rate of liquidated damages in the contract, and it is a pre-agreed rate. And so it is automatically payable as opposed to the upstream party having to prove how much cost they've incurred. And liquidated damages are different to general damages for delay because they are pre-ascertained, okay? General damages for delay, whenever you're talking about general damages, the person claiming the damages needs to prove their actual loss. Some strategies regarding time and progress and EOTs, programming, contingency in your programming. Do not undercut yourself on the program. Once again, we come up against a very hard barrier where we're trying to give a great quote, we're trying to do a quick program to get the job. It's counterproductive. So make sure you have some contingency in your programming. Essential qualifying. Now, I'm not going to say essential compensable causes of delay, but as I mentioned before, you must have qualifying causes of delay in a contract. You must have the ability to get more time because anything can happen in a project. You may agree to not have delay costs in a contract. That's a commercial decision. But qualifying causes of delay, they must be present. And at the very least, they should include variations and acts or omissions of the upstream party, for example, the main contractor or the principal, which is a very broad thing. An act or omission, an omission means not doing something, an act means doing something. So that's very broad. It's almost anything that can happen. Okay, so they're essential. If you see a contract and it does happen with no entitlement to an EOT, it's an absolute red flag and you should never accept it. Once again, EOT claims, very similar to variation claims. Follow the contract. Do not accept verbal assurances for anything, and everything must be in writing. Liquidated damages. Negotiate your LDs. We're saying that the rate of LDs is a pre-ascertained and pre-agreed rate. Well, if that's the case, then it should be reasonable, it should be indicative of the actual costs to the upstream party if you delay, okay? You see crazy liquidated damages rates like $12,000 a day on a $200,000 job. Now, it could be that the loss truly will be $12,000, but usually that's not the case. So we need to make sure it's a legitimate estimate, and we also need to make sure that there are caps on LDs. A cap is, for example, 15% of the contract price, 5%, 10%, whatever your commercial decision is, whatever you can bear and what you think is appropriate. But LD should not be uncapped, okay? Okay, now payments is a big one. We could have a 3-day seminar on just payments, including payment rights under the contract and particularly payments under the Building Construction Industry Security Payments Act in New South Wales. Now, I am going to kind of focus on the Act for the purpose of this because I think with the contract's the contract. It depends on what your contract says regarding your payment rights. The thing that I really want to impress upon everyone is that the Act gives everyone statutory rights which are actually very favourable towards the downstream party. And so to understand the Act is a huge plus. So as I said, contractual rights are there. It depends on what your contract says. The contract is constrained by the Act in a number of circumstances. As I put there, it trumps the contract in a number of instances. The Act trumps the contract. For example, entitlement to claim payment. Some contracts will not really, they will either not have a provision about claiming payment, or you may come to a time in your contract when there is no longer an opportunity to claim payment. Now, a very common example of that is after final certificate. After final certificate, a contract will ordinarily not provide a further opportunity to claim payment, to put a payment claim in. The Act will, assuming that certain criteria are met, the Act will provide you a further opportunity to put in that payment claim, which is where everything flows from. The due date for payment. I see more and more that the due date for payment in contracts are you put in a payment claim on the 25th day and it's not due until the 3rd week of the 2nd month, something like this. Very long terms for payment, for due dates for payment. The Act provides for a due date for payment, a compulsory due date for payment. Pay when paid provisions, very common provisions in subcontracts. We'll pay you when practical completion, or for example, release of security. We'll pay you when something happens under the head contract. Okay, this is called a pay when paid provision. Very, very common with release of security. The Act prohibits pay when paid provisions. And so any provision like that, basically what I can say is that where payment to a person under a subcontract is contingent upon the operation of another contract, that is a pay when paid provision. So you have no control over, for example, a head contract. And so that helps you in that circumstance to get payment. Service of documents, the Act provides for the method of service of documents. And there's no contracting out of the Act. There are a lot of statutes in New South Wales where you can put a provision in the contract to restrict or avoid the operation of a statute. That's not the case here. It cannot be contracted out of. In saying all this, there are very strict timeframes, and it is a very technical process in terms of timeframes, and you have to have a decent amount of knowledge about the Act itself to properly interact with the Act. Also, it's contractual claims only. So that means contractual claims and contractual set-offs. If the contract doesn't give you a right to something besides the things that I mentioned, you cannot recover that money in adjudication. So there's no general damages, and the adjudicator can't consider equitable matters like quantum merit. So quantum merit is where you've done work, there's no contract, you're entitled to be paid on an equitable basis. An adjudicator can't consider that. So it must be your right to payment must arise from the contract, and conversely, any right of set-off, which means when an upstream party deducts from your payment, any right of set-off must also be in the contract. Otherwise, it cannot be recovered, or that cannot be a reason for withholding in adjudication. And if you do engage the use of the Act, you can recover the amount by adjudication or in court. And I'm not going to go into those processes. It's just too much information, I think. But there are two pathways, adjudication and court. In a nutshell, adjudication is very quick. It's a roll of the dice. However, it does favour the downstream party, but it's less certain than court. It's also only on an interim basis. So when you go to court for a contractual dispute, the determination of the court is final. When you engage in adjudication, you will get a determination, it can be enforced, you get the payment. However, the upstream party can go and open up the contract again in court. So it's interim. And that's why it is so smash and grab, because it is an interim process. It's not a final process like court. Now, some strategies regarding payments. Number one is understand the Act. The Act is actually, as I said, very protective towards the downstream party. It is designed to be accessible to non-legal practitioners. In practice, a lot of, especially with bigger amounts, there are a lot of lawyers involved, but it is theoretically supposed to be accessible to non-legal practitioners, and the adjudicator, there are no requirements such as rules of evidence, etc. So it should be accessible to everyone. If you know the Act, you can adjudicate. There are some resources such as the Annotated Act, which is available through Adjudicate Today. Just in my personal opinion, I think it's the quality of that document is declining slightly, but it is still a good resource. It basically goes through the Act and gives you footnotes about each and every provision or every section of the Act. Now, one of the big things, especially for waterproofers, and it's not just waterproofers, we see it in all different kinds of subcontracts, is acceptance of prior works. It's a major issue. I'm going to show you some example provisions in a contract which relate to acceptance of prior works, which can get really tricky. We all know the importance of this substrate, so that is the acceptance, that's the prior works in this case. Once again, the interaction of trades is very important, and compatibility of waterproofing products with surrounding areas. Some example provisions, I've just highlighted the words in there that really hit home. The subcontractor shall allow to ensure that the waterproofing systems are compatible with all surrounding substrates, including but not limited to, screeds, etc. Including but not limited to. It's a very vague, it's vague. Lawyers will have a field day fighting about it. So you can see there what the problem is. And it's not an insurmountable problem, as you'll see. There are ways to work around this. The subcontractor is responsible for obtaining correct levels and dimensions on site. You really need to think about, do you know that you're responsible for that? Because in many contracts, it's not the responsibility of the subcontractor. So you need to understand, are you expecting to do that work? Can you do that work? The subcontractor assumes the sole risk of all site conditions and unconditionally accepts the quality and adequacy of all prior work carried out or to be carried out by others with which the works are to be integrated. That third one is the worst one, because sole risk of all site conditions depends what the rest of the contract says. Unconditionally accepts the quality and adequacy of not only prior work, but work to be carried out. So it's a terrible clause. Sorry?
I'm going to use that one.
Some strategies. Thorough inspection and documentation of prior works. People are, once again, it comes back to programming. You undercut yourself on the program, there's been delays and you're just in there ready to do the work. That's great, you want to do the work. You must properly inspect and document the prior works. Not just inspect, document it. Videos, photos, whatever it might be. Get the interacting trades ITPs or anything like that. Notification of issues, massive. You must, once you've done your inspection, you must notify of every single issue. If in doubt, notify. See whether a variation is required. It comes back to the scope of works. It comes back to all those things where you've inspected the prior works and there's all these things that you've excluded it from your scope of works. The person you're expecting to do it didn't do it, etc. See if a variation is required. If a variation was required, you go back to the previous slide. Claim it properly, all that type of thing. Act in accordance with the contract. Don't start work until those relevant checks are done, and communicate that to your crew. Don't have people going there with the best of intentions, starting work, and then you've accepted prior works. That's it. That's what the upstream party will be arguing. Oh well, you did something. You swept the floor. You accepted the prior works. That's the kind of arguments we're talking about. Kamal? Okay, we're getting towards the end of the contract now. The completion of the works and the defects liability period, or DLP. Once again, documentation. We're documenting the inspection of the works, of the prior works, sorry, but we're also documenting all throughout the course of the works. At the end of the works, we're taking videos, we're taking photos. There are so many documentation platforms for works that can be utilised, and that, yeah, it may be a cost of production that feels like you don't want to pay that money or you don't want to spend that time. It can save you in the end. The defects liability period, look at the duration. Now, everyone's a waterproofer here. We're not talking about things like formwork or anything like that where we'd be fighting against the DLP. We're talking about waterproofing. There'll be, nowadays we're seeing 24-month DLPs, and that's because of different pieces of legislation that have come in that, especially if you're working in class 2s, high density, we've seen different legislation come in with bonds and things like that. And so often we're seeing 24-month DLPs. Traditionally they were 12 months. Once again, the duration of the DLP, it is a commercial decision to a certain extent. It depends on the nature of your project. So that's for you, but it's something to note. Notices during the DLP. A lot of the time, especially in respect of security, you've achieved practical completion. The upstream party's still holding security. What happens? Maybe they undercut themselves on their quote as well, and they're trying to get some money back, okay? Oh, well, what happens? They start finding defects, okay? You need to make sure that the appropriate notices you receive, that they're following the DLP process under the contract. Usually what the process is that if a defect is identified during the DLP, they must notify you. If you do not rectify within a certain time, they are entitled to go and get another contractor to do that work. And then you are liable for the cost of that work. Now, what often happens is that defects are identified, notices are not given, works are maybe rectified, maybe not, and then they pull the security. They pull that last 50% of the security. It's very common. So you have to make sure, keep in touch with your upstream parties after practical completion. Practical completion is not completion. Stay on top of your jobs and make sure everything's okay. Very quickly, I don't want to dwell on this, but termination of a contract, just a few issues to note. Termination can be effected if one of the parties commits a substantial breach. What is a substantial breach depends on what's in your contract, okay? Notices are very important. If you're ever terminating contract, even as lawyers, we're shaking when we terminate a contract. We have to be extremely careful. Notices, check what the notices are. The notice provisions for terminating contracts may be completely different to notices for variation claims, EOT claims, etc., any other notice. I'm not going to worry too much about repudiation, but the reason I've got repudiation there is because I want you to understand when a party, let's say, for want of a better word, acts like they don't want to be bound by the contract anymore, they're doing things that are opposite to the contract, etc. This might be a repudiation, okay? Now, the reason why I mention that, and it's a difficult topic to talk about because it's very complex. But one thing I want you to know is that if you feel that a party has repudiated a contract, you must take action. You must not carry on as if nothing happened, because if you do, you will lose your right to terminate the contract. And as I said, I don't want to go in too depth because termination of contract is a very, very complex area. But I think these are just some things to think about when you're in dispute and potentially get legal advice. A big one is termination for convenience. You'll find that a lot in your subcontracts. It's not as scary as it sounds. It's not an unusual clause, and it's even there in the standard form contracts. You need to consider if the upstream party was to terminate for convenience, which just means terminating because they feel like it. You have to think, what do I need to cover myself if they terminate out of the blue? And that's what should be in the contract. What do you need? Do you need demobilisation? Do you need a certain % of your contract price to cover from loss of profit? Something like that. What do you need for your business? The effect of termination, unless something in the contract survives termination, essentially what happens at termination is no one has to do anything else anymore. No one else has to do anything under the contract anymore. And so all bets are off, except for a few things that are often in contracts that survive termination. Wrongful termination, once again, very complex area, but the long and short of it is, if you feel that a party has terminated the contract without cause, which is what we call wrongful termination, then you may have some legal recourse to pursue them for whatever loss you've suffered. So that's just something to keep in mind. But once again, all these things, consult a lawyer. I wouldn't say consult a lawyer for all these things. You might have complex claims, etc., variations, EOTs, those types of disputes. If you keep on top of those things, you can manage them. Things like termination is a very complex area, and I recommend getting legal advice. So just very quickly, the other sources of liability, depending on the nature of the work you're doing. If you're doing commercial work, Home Building Act doesn't apply. Anyone doing residential work, Home Building Act, it's a big one. Design and Building Practitioners Act, that's a very new piece of legislation which we're only really beginning to understand now. That also has provisions regarding, and the case law that's come about, there is personal liability under the Design and Building Practitioners Act. Another example is Australian consumer law. Misleading and deceptive conduct in building construction is one of the most litigated claims. Common law and equitable causes of action, they're just things like, things like quantum meruit, as I mentioned before. It's a common thing for builders, depending on your method of doing things, I guess, because usually, especially equitable causes of action, they come about when something's gone wrong with the contract, when we're making arguments because contracts weren't followed and there was some side agreement, these types of things. A very common argument we make, even in adjudication, is a thing called estoppel. And that's when, for example, you're not following the contract with variation claims, you're not following the contract with EOT claims, but you've got this verbal agreement, or they haven't enforced their rights for you to actually do the claims properly. So we make an argument to say, well, this was the agreement between the parties, and so therefore they're bound by it. So this is an example of an equitable argument. But as I said, the contract is key. If you follow the contract, you can't go wrong. And to follow the contract, you must know the contract. I know that was a lot of information. Any questions?
Anyone else has a question, just put your hand up and I'll come over to you after Sandra.
First of all, thank you. That was a very insightful presentation.
Thank you.
My question just relates to the Payment of Security Act, where a progress claim's been submitted. The head contractor has 10 days to assess the claim, gives it to the contractor, subcontractor back on the 9th day with some very declined acceptance of claim. And then when we go back to negotiate, what is the legal right of the subcontractor in the time frame to negotiate what has been rejected? Because commonly they say, oh, sorry, too late, we've given you a payment schedule, you have to wait another 30 days. So now you're 60 days end of month payment terms. I've spent 12 years managing those relationships, and they are relationship based. Sometimes there's reasonable CAs that will amend or provide another, but it is getting harder and harder, that window to renegotiate declinements in claim.
The key thing that I take from that is you can go back and try to negotiate. I always recommend it. Go and try to have a chat, but you must stick to the timeframes to adjudicate. And sometimes upstream parties who behave like that, all they need to do is, if you adjudicate every time they do that, and it is possible, you have to hold that kind of leverage against them. But the main thing is you can negotiate all you want, but you have to, if you want to adjudicate, you want to get the money, you have to stick to those timeframes. There is no provision to extend any timeframe under the Act.
Sorry, so in regards to once the 10 days reach,
Yes.
that closes off technically closes off that window?
So if you receive the payment schedule on the 9th day, the upstream party has 10 days to provide it. If you receive it on the 9th, then depending on the nature of the payment schedule, you'll have a certain time frame to submit an adjudication application. If they've scheduled less than what is claimed, then you have 10 days from receipt of the payment schedule. If they have scheduled the full amount but don't pay by the due date, then you have a certain amount of time.
Yep.
So notwithstanding any negotiations that are happening, you must follow the Act if you want to adjudicate. And I recommend adjudicating even if you don't engage a lawyer, because it's more trouble than it's worth for the upstream party.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep, thank you.
No worries.
Well, thank you. That was a lot of information. Just a question with retention.
Yes.
This is more of a question from a subcontractor's point of view. Can a builder take retention from one project to use it to rectify damages and claims on another project that he did, but there's not enough funds in it? Is that a thing?
If the sometimes contracts will say that the upstream party can have recourse to retention if they have a claim against the downstream party on any contract. So sometimes a contract will say that. If it doesn't say that, it's only under that contract.
Okay, so
Yes.
it has to be clear.
It must say it. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The contract must have provision that allows the upstream party to set off against monies owed to the downstream party on any contract. Sometimes it says things like this or any other contract. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. No.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. That was actually a great presentation.
Oh, sorry. Who am I looking at?
Yeah, right.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, there's too much.
Okay.
Going back to the question I just got asked about the offset clauses.
Yes.
We look at contracts, both what's in the contract, but we also know what goes from a legislative perspective and common law perspective. Isn't offset clauses under common law not really binding?
No.
They are binding?
An offset clause or a set-off clause in a contract is, there's no problem with it. Yeah, I mean, why would you think it wasn't binding?
No,
Like
just a
an
question.
unfair term, for example?
Yeah, potentially.
Look, it's questionable whether it's maybe an unfair contract term. It could be, depending on the nature of the set-off. Because, for example, if the set-off right is too broad, and whoever's the downstream party is considered a small business, for example, the new unfair contract terms cover small businesses, like so within a certain size. It could be found that under the Contracts Review Act that it wasn't couldn't be enforced. So that's an example of potentially, where under the Contracts Review Act, it could be found to be, it could be struck out. But otherwise, generally, as long as the set-off clause, it comes back to when it's two commercial parties at arm's length, set-off clause, even broad rights to set off are enforceable. It's just more consumer contracts, small business contracts and things like that, where I would say it would be arguably not enforceable. Yeah.
Just with the scope of works section,
Yeah.
We spoke about inclusions and exclusions. We, being from a subcontractor point of view, if you're given a scope of works and you scratch out or put a line for a certain item in your
Yep.
scope of works,
Yep.
does that count as an exclusion?
Yes, as long as it is annexed to the contract. So if you're
Yeah.
having negotiations and you send it to them by email and go, hey, I've scratched out all these things, and they go, yeah, okay, cool, and then later you sign a contract and it's not in there, it's just the scope of works with no cross out, well, you can argue something, but it's a lot harder once it comes back to this thing of having things included in the contract.
Okay, even though they haven't clearly defined the exclusions in their quote.
As I said, exclusions are very, very important. So if you're saying, is scribbling out an item of scope of works as good as an exclusion? I would say yes.
Okay.
I would say yes. If it's got, I don't know, what are we going to say, 3 layers of membrane, and you scratch it out and say 2, well, yeah, it's as good as an exclusion. If they come back to you and say, you were supposed to do 3 layers, and you go, no, look at this. It's very arguable that that is not a part of the scope of works. And that's a good point, actually. We see people scribbling over contracts. That's fine. It gives an argument. Not doing it or not including the proper document is the biggest problem. If you can't amend the document and you just want to scribble all over it and put comments, as long as we can read your writing, and as long as it's in the contract, the biggest mistake people do is it's not in the contract. They're performing their works as if they're relying on the quote or the whatever it might be, tender documents. Those things don't mean anything unless they're in the contract or referred to in the contract. Yeah.
I was just going to say in relation to that, though, surely both parties have to agree to it, though. You can't just scribble out if the builder doesn't agree to it and you cross out, like you just mentioned, 3 membranes, we're going to put 2 in.
But
Surely both parties have got to agree to it.
Well, yes, but for example, if that's what's in the contract, whoever didn't agree to that, I mean, both parties, whoever signs the contract is expected to read the contract. And so if the contract bundle is there and everyone signs it, and that scratch out is there, and the builder, for example, doesn't notice it, well, they would have to argue that they didn't know and there was some other agreement or something like that. That'll be a very hard argument. But it all comes back to what's in the contract.
Isn't it typical, though, in a contract, if there is any changes done, that they're initialed by the parties, you know, so...
It depends on the nature of the change. So if the contract is issued, the bundle's issued, and the parties subsequently make changes on that document, then they need to be initialed. But if it's a document such as a scope of works which has been crossed out and potentially agreed earlier, then that's the contract. Because that's what's been signed, that's the actual counterpart of what's been signed, as opposed to issuing and making changes later. Not after signature, not after signing the contract, but for example, after issuing the contract.
I noticed that you said we can ask for other contractors' ITPs.
You
now,
can ask,
is the main contractor entitled to say no?
Look, it all depends. It all depends. As I said, a main contractor might be resistant to providing ITPs, to providing scope of works, all that type of thing. The best thing you can do is ask, and unless you have something, you can try to put it in your contract.
I guess because where I'm coming from is, as waterproofing subcontractors, where we get caught out is we're dictated by 1 in 100 faults, for example. And as you know, if we accept an area, it becomes our responsibility. So if we are asking for the concreter's ITP to state that he has achieved those falls, I guess, are we entitled to see those ITPs and to get them from the main contractor?
I would say as a general principle, there's no general principle that you're entitled. I would say I would be asking for that, and I would be trying to put it in my contract. If you think that's a thing that the upstream party is going to be resistant to, put it in your quote, put it in your tender, say that's a requirement, that's what you need. Because I think, once again, if the upstream party is very resistant to that, it makes you question, well, do you want to work with this person?
We should put it in our inclusions then?
Yeah. Well, what you should do is you should try to get it as a condition of the contract. So when you quote or when you put in your tender documents, whatever it might be, say a requirement will be that you have access to all the ITPs and whatever you think you need. And a good main contractor should be open to that. You're trying to actually avoid problems.
Yep.
And you know, and this is once again with the scope of works of interacting trades. What's the concreter being told to do about falls? So, you know, you go and look at their scope of works and there's nothing in there about falls. Well, you can, if you see it early enough, you can tell the upstream party, hey, we don't think, you know, we won't be able to fix falls if the concreter doesn't do it this way. And so therefore we think you need to, you know, change the scope of works. Yeah.
I had one more.
Yeah.
Just on one of our contracts, we got caught out with a clause, and it was about payment on account or approved on account.
Yes.
And basically what we found out was there was a contract where we were getting approved month on month, and then when it got to the final claim, they just decided to go into every item that they had that term payment on account, and thought that they could just, you know, sort of reduce our claim.
Set off against your final claim.
And it become this massive argument in the end. And then we obviously, you know, came to an agreement at the end, but I guess what I'm getting at is there a way to avoid getting into that situation?
I would say that having payments being on account is very, very standard now. I don't think I've seen a contract that doesn't say all payments are on account. It ties in directly with the set-off right for the upstream party. I guess it's a very hard thing to combat, but I guess with things like, was it defects? Were they setting off for alleged defects, or?
It was more so it was a contract where it was on rates.
Okay.
So it's like, okay, we do a certain amount of meters for that month, we get paid for that, we get, you know, approved. And then there was obviously variations as well, but it wasn't until we got to the final claim that they wanted to go back and sort of reduce everything and say, no, actually here, you probably didn't install that much. We don't believe, you know, you installed this much quantity, and then in the end it just become this one big messy argument.
And maybe it goes back to then how you were proving your claim, how you were evidencing your claim, and maybe that's a point that you can maybe do better. Because I would think if you're doing per metre, you would have some type of evidence to substantiate the meterage.
This particular case, no, it was issuing a markup, but and then getting a sign-off from a representative. But again, it goes back to your point, it's a foreman on site and not necessarily a project manager or someone senior in that organisation.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know the exact circumstances, but it sounds like there wasn't very solid evidence, and that's not necessarily because you didn't document it or anything like that. It could be something that's hard to evidence. But I would say the way to combat it, I guess, is have some type of an agreement about how the claims are evidenced to avoid that. But it sounds like a tricky question. But I would also question, for example, if you went to adjudication on that point, I would question what evidence they had to say that you didn't install the meterage that you did. So it cuts both ways.
Okay, thank you very much.
Nice.
The pace in which obviously construction works, sometimes we commence work prior to the contract and departures all being negotiated. So months are rolling, we're invoicing, claiming, and we're getting feedback that we can't pay you because the contract has not been executed and departures have not been negotiated, but yet there's an obligation and expectation to keep the project moving and do the work. Is that something, again, that you may advise your clients to make that provision, inclusion in your contract, that if you engage us prior to the execution that it should be paid, or is there any rights for, you know, consultants, contractors? It affects a number of parties, I guess, servicing the head contractor that wants us to do the work.
Yes. So often there will be something like a preliminary agreement, an early works agreement, a letter of intent in place. Now, you know, there are some letters of intent which really don't say much at all. But there are preliminary agreements that are very, very simple and just cover the very key things like payment and time. And then what happens is once you go into the main contract, it will incorporate the prior works and make the prior works a part of the main contract once you go into it. But one thing I would recommend against is just doing work because you're being asked to with no contract in place. Now, in terms of adjudication and things like that, the definition of construction contract or other arrangement is very broad. You could still adjudicate in those circumstances. It's an uphill battle. It's one you don't want to fight because you have to start fighting about, oh, well, what the terms of that other arrangement were. So early works agreement, preliminary agreement, just about payment and time or scope, things like that. Just have a very, very simple agreement in place and maybe push back against months and months of performing work when there's no contract in place.
Hi, I just got a question about the inclusions and exclusions in a subcontract. You know, being a subcontractor, often in the contract review stage, you'll find provisions or inclusions that are mentioned multiple times, almost like you find some provisions that are mentioned 4 to 5 times in a contract. And, you know, in the review stage, you may spot 3 or 4 of them and cross them out and put an exclusion or a comment in place, you know, and you miss one.
Yes.
And that gets used against us later on during the project. What I'm trying to ask is there any kind of legal way or something to use as a subcontractor to say that because we've crossed it out multiple times and put in comments, that it is assumed that wherever, like anywhere else in the contract that it's mentioned, it should be assumed that it's also crossed out?
Yes. The key that you mentioned is the specific exclusion. The specific exclusion. So there's a legal principle that says specific things override general things. So if something's mentioned 5 times, and even if you only cross out 2, but there's a specific exclusion, the specific exclusion will trump the failure to cross out those 3 other occasions. The exclusions are very, very important for scope of works. It's the key. So even if you didn't cross out anything, if you have a specific exclusion, that is the key.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
No worries.
Sorry, I've just got another question. Just directly with falls, I think, because I feel like recently that's been something that have caught us out a lot. In a subcontract, again, if we cross out, you know, the subcontractor being solely responsible for ensuring we've got, you know, 1 in 100 falls everywhere, we often cross that out under the basis that we are not always qualified to do a complete survey of the area. You know, where generally you can have 1 in 100 falls, but you can have areas where it's ponding or it's not performing as well. But again, on site, if you depend on what the builder says, and he says, you know, I've done my survey, you've got 1 in 100 falls, generally we check and we do, but after the membrane's applied, you find out that there's ponding in certain areas, and the contractor always tries to pin that on the contractor, the subcontract, and say, oh, you accepted the area.
Yeah, it comes back to the acceptance of prior works. It comes back to, for example, if you are responsible for levels, if you feel that you're not able to verify levels, it shouldn't be in your contract. So, and also things like sole responsibility, you see that all the time. You'll see contracts for interacting trades that have all got the same provision saying they're all solely responsible, because the upstream party wants to have a crack at everyone, or wants to at least have the ability to have a crack at everyone. So it's understanding what's happening around you, and anything that you can't do, like verifying levels, it shouldn't be part of your works. And if the upstream party is then going to provide you the relevant levels, then you're entitled to rely on that. And if any defect arises out of a discrepancy in levels or a defect in the levels, then that's not your responsibility. It's you are entitled to rely on those levels, and therefore the defect is caused by the upstream party providing you wrong levels, assuming that you can evidence that that's what the defect arose from.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
No worries.
Any other questions? Anyone else? No.
Sorry. Head contract obligations. A lot of times we request a copy of the head contract so we can review it, and 9 out of 10 times we don't receive it. Would it hold in court or adjudication, the fact that we've requested and never received it? How can we be obliged to follow something we've never had the opportunity to read?
Yeah. Yeah, so with, depending on the context of the issue with the head contract variations, as I said with payment, there's a very strong argument to fight against being paid based on the head contract. Now, I'd be pushing back very hard against, for example, requiring your works to comply with something that you haven't seen. I wouldn't be accepting that, simply, because it's impossible. How do you know what's in the head contract? So even if you request it and you're not provided a copy, and it could be a redacted copy, we understand that a head contract, an upstream party or a head contractor may not want to provide you with the full head contract. That's fine. But a redacted copy, I would be questioning why it's not being provided if you're being required to comply with anything related to the head contract, and that requirement is not then in the subcontract, if that's not then included in the subcontract. Yeah.
I've just got one really quick one, just because I think it'll be valuable to a lot of people. I think waterproofing being relatively small trade out of all of them, I think that a lot of contractors get caught in this sort of awkward spot of where I'm talking about retentions here, that it's just maybe not worth chasing. I don't know, probably you guys would be better to say this than me, but if it's, say you've got a $100,000 contract and retention is what, 5%, it's 2.5 at OC and then another 2.5 years later. That 2.5 is, even 5,000, 10,000, depending on how difficult the contract is going to be. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, what I would say is, once again, that goes back to, that's a commercial decision regarding your retention, form of retention. Whatever you do to pursue any claim, it's always a commercial decision. You can have a $20,000 fight about a $5,000 variation, but there's no point. So it's always that commercial decision about what you're going to do to recover any money. Even having a big fight, even having a $200,000, $300,000 fight, it may not be worth it. So you need to, that's a commercial decision.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you very much, Maddie. Nice. That was great. I personally enjoyed it. I think everyone else did.
And there's a lot of information.
Yes. Okay, guys, so that was our keynote for tonight. That was the big one out of the way. We do have a couple of smaller ones up with Craig next from Comply Build. So a lot of the stuff we're talking about is not only making sure everything's stitched up with your contract, but then keeping good records of everything that you do or the conversations that you have and whatnot, right? So I think we're all be familiar with the days of paper ITPs and that sort of thing. But, we're a digital world these days, right? And those digital offerings keep changing and evolving. And I think what Craig offers is really useful. So, Craig, you got 10 minutes to show us what it's all about, mate. I will steal your mic back.
There we go. All right. Well, I've set a timer, so I'm not going to go overtime. You've all been here a while. A bit flogged probably after a long day. Well, my name is Craig, and I'm a little bit different to sort of some of the other things that we've heard about today. I'm looking at this from digitising construction, risk management, and how do we keep better records for our own business. Now, I'm fortunate, and I like to think I'm fortunate, that I entered the wonderful world of wet area construction without the technical background. Not a technical expert, and I'm not even the number one. I'm not an expert in digital technology. I'd never claim to be the best. But I've been able to spend the last few years interviewing hundreds of trades, builders, new construction, remedial, manufacturers, third-party design and inspection companies or teams. And what I've been able to do is take a clear lens on the industry and assess it for what it is. So what I'm going to talk about is 4 things. Well, one, how do we really cover ourselves against risk and looking at digital tools to do so, why it matters, what's broken or what are we getting wrong, and how do we fix it together? How do we improve it together? When we hear QA, software, digital tools, we want to hear more of that like we want a hole in the head. I mean, we hear it every day. We're probably running multiple platforms to run our business. It doesn't matter what you do, it's getting out of hand. But in essence, digital record keeping is just a simple medium to prove a sequence of steps of what was done by who, by how, and when, in a way that's easy to share that information with everybody who needs to hear it and see it. Good record keeping builds trust. It speeds up resolution when things happen on site, and it stops the he said, she said that we see and I see every single day. So it eliminates I've got a really good relationship with the builder, because memory and relationship, well, it's not verifiable proof. And good records turn arguments. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Good records trump any argument or discrepancy or issue that you've had on a job site. What I'm seeing is a whole lot of mismanagement of how we identify the series of steps that we undertake our waterproofing or anything in that complex wet area construction space. We need to understand who did it, what the area was, why the work was done, and clear evidence that's verifiable. And I'll probably spend a little bit more time on this slide than the others. But right now, we've got too many tools to run our business. If you wouldn't mind, just a show of hands, it doesn't matter what you do, who uses more than 5 different tools to run their business? Yeah. And that could be just around your construction management, your quality control, your safety, your HR, your invoicing, scheduling. It's a lot. And none of it really speaks to one another. And I'm not here to talk about the product that I sell. I'm talking about the industry in general. So what I'm seeing a lot of, from the builder's perspective, and sometimes from the trade's perspective, is we're still looking at rigid systems, more of an Excel-based ITP. And when I even ask a lot of trades, particularly the applicators, what an ITP is, often they'll say, isn't that a disease? Thankfully, it's becoming more common. But we've still got a ways to go, particularly in that Class 1 space. Where we're seeing people get hung up is there is a lack of flexibility. There's a disconnect between the series of steps that we're taking and how we're grouping that information. Dropbox is an example, or your CMS platform. And I'm not even here to even mention names of any other companies. But what we see is a massive photo dump of information and then some steps that should have been followed. And then somebody's got to tie all of that together. And if it goes to court, what are they going to use to hang you out? That's the way we look at this. We're going to re-engineer how they're going to hang you out and stop it from happening in the first place. But I understand why trades, I won't say force, strongly encourage why the builders encourage the subcontractors to use their systems. Because often the trades don't have a sound system that they can easily share information. It's WhatsApp. I haven't got the actual stat, but I wouldn't be pretty far off to say 98% of waterproofers run their business off WhatsApp. Create group by group, level by level, job by job. Masses of information get dumped in there. Now I know that if I was having a conversation with my baseball team and all of a sudden something work-related came in and I'm just now uploading a photo and it goes into the wrong chat, it's a problem. We get lack of clarity, lost information, and what happens is it creates a huge admin burden for everyone involved. But the trades, similar. Whether they keep all of their information stored in WhatsApp, Dropbox, OneDrive, or something similar, it's just a photo dump. It's disconnected. But everybody is working hard. Applicators are on the job site, other trades, they're working as hard as they can. And capturing evidence looks and feels like it's a slowdown. This is going to slow us down. Sometimes we need to just slow down a little bit to speed us up. All right. My understanding over the last few years, what's broken? Well, I look at the ITPs that I see on a weekly basis, particularly those that go towards the trades by the builders, and they're long, they're confusing. It looks like they're about controlling the trade. And I speak generally, I'm not talking about any particular company at all. Whereas the installers, their ITPs or their process is too general. It's way too general. Creates a lot of headaches if things go sideways. And the manufacturer, well, they're the one that got to make sure that they can warrant their product for a boatload of years. And there's a lot of variables that they can't control. So how do we fix it? We need a 3-layer or 3-tier ITP model. Because the builder, their ITP is different to the trade. The builder's ITP is about making sure that the site is adequately prepared. Making sure that the trades have everything in place so they can start applying their work. So they're not going to get caught out. We heard it earlier before about the 1 in 100 falls. And I'm probably going to miss a step and I'm going to go back, so I'll apologise, but I'll do it at the end. Whereas the installer, their ITP or their checklist, that has to be more instructive, informative, and evidence-based. Whereas the inspector, whether you're a third-party design inspector or you're the manufacturer inspecting the installation of the product, that's about the end result. Does it align to the codes and standards, the installation requirements from the product manufacturers? And so when I look at where we're at as an industry, if anybody knows anything about Chris Voss, who's ever read the book Never Split the Difference, he says, yes is nothing without how. When we look at checklists or ITPs, procedures that are yes and no and very basic, and you can't verify and prove that those sequence of steps have been achieved, you haven't got the how. Yes means nothing. So we look at the builder who has a really tough job. Ultimately, they've got to take a boatload of information, collate it, and hand it off to the client who's going to care for that building for many, many years. And often they don't have the information that they need because they're busy chasing around, trying to get that from the trades, and the trades themselves, and I'm going to go back to this in just a sec, are equally as busy putting roadblocks in front of them. So we need a system that talks to all parties involved, the builder, the trade, and the inspector, whether it be the manufacturer or the third-party design team. So what we get when we do have a system that speaks to all of the relevant stakeholders, those paying the bills, those doing the work, and those inspecting and signing off on it, we get something that builds trust. We're not looking at more admin. This is an example of one of our reports, where on each time that you share something with your builder who's going to be paying you or your client, you verify what were the products used. And if you were to click on those, you would see the product details. Evidence of the actual products on site with the batch numbers in this example. And then line item by line item, what was done at each key stage in a manner that can't be manipulated and those images can't go anywhere. Because I'm going to circle back to one of the biggest problems that we see with the trades. Is that when you're uploading information into somebody else's system, you're doing two things. One, you're double handling. You're probably keeping record for your own risk management, but you're also spending a significant amount of time. I'm not silly in saying that if you're uploading information on a bathroom in a Class 2 job, it's taking you 10 minutes. And if you're doing 200 bathrooms, that's 33 hours that you're wiping off your bottom line. You're not charging the builder for it, they're not paying it. It's coming out of your bottom line. And once it goes into your system, not to play the blame game, but that information can move around, it can go missing. And if something does go pear-shaped in a couple of years' time, you've got one set of records here and another set of records here. Whereas being able to have a collaborative approach where information can be sent and not then moved or manipulated, everyone is on the same page. When we look at where construction is right now, particularly when we're building apartments, things change. Slab heights, falls, it all changes. And I often hear from trades, it's okay, I'm covered, because I take lots of photos. Taking lots of photos is just one part of it. But in 3 years' time, when something goes pear-shaped, if the issues that you saw on the job site weren't identified and all parties are held to account and taken the responsibility, then it's he said, she said. So by creating a system, and WhatsApp ain't it, that where things do pop up on a job site, we can have a conversation, get clarity in writing, and move on. So the photos now stack up against the signatures and the verifications. And I think we're getting there. Thankfully now we're starting to see trades look at the way that they manage their risk a little bit better, rather than just, I've got a good relationship with the builder. The builder has a really tough time. I'm not here to hang out the builder. They have a really, really tough time. When the trades are moving away from the likes of the WhatsApps, and she'll be right, mate, we're going to make some real progress. And so if anyone wants to learn more about what we do, I'm not here to push it, but you can scan the QR code and we can have a conversation, even if it's for us to take a look at your current process as a trade and see if what we do helps, or we can point you in the right direction for a better solution for how you run your business. Be happy to have that chat. Well, I appreciate the time chatting. I appreciate the opportunity, and thanks so much for taking a few minutes to listen.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you very much for that, Craig. That would be great. I might go to the audience for questions just in the sake of time. We'll try very hard to wrap up at 8. But there is just one comment that I would like to make, is that I hear more and more that waterproofing contractors aren't getting their full claim paid because they haven't provided their ITPs. And this actually might be a hot take, but good. Like, it's a pretty reasonable thing for a builder to expect that you've done your work and you've given and you've handed over a record, right? So stuff like this, there's no reason not to. It is, easy to do. So, it's something we've got to get on board with. So thank you very much for that, Craig. And yeah. And lastly, I would like to welcome Stan Juris up to give us what I would consider, I've been trying to think about how to introduce you. I'm going to be a little bit creative and say you're going to be the ghost of Christmas yet to come, as far as if you don't take on board things around contracts but also quality and get your bases covered now, potentially what sort of boat you can land up in the future. And that's where Stan spends a lot of his time in the post-completion expert witness work. So welcome, Stan, take it away.
Cheers. So I'll be quick. It's been a long night. So I do a lot of duty of care, economic loss, and how that's fitting into the industry. It's fairly new, and it's especially still new for the contractors' place. We've got a judgment, I guess you could say, on builders, where they can't delegate their duty of care. But I've got waterproofers, waterproof consultants, project managers who have been taken to task. The interesting one was the waterproof consultant. They went for the company. It's a well-known company. And they put the guy's personal name on every bit of litigation, and they went for his personal assets. So it is a really interesting piece of litigation. But it's got, so you've got your, in 2 years, we know that defect everything, the scratch on the window, paint defects. At 6 years, it's fire, structure, water. In that 6 to 10, it's got to be negligent. So it's a much higher bar to cross negligence from a legal perspective. So it's got to be foreseeable, it's got to be reasonable, it's got to have risk, it's got to have an economic loss. So one that we defended the waterproofer on, the facade engineer said 100 mil turn up for the membrane. He did an 85 mil turn up because that's where the DPC came out for the flashing. Folded the flashing up, turned the membrane up nicely, folded it over. The lawyers just basically wanted to sue 17 parties on that job. So they brought in the waterproofer. So my position was it would be negligent if he followed the facade design and ran the membrane to 100 mil, which would have covered the bottom 15 of the weep holes and the flashing. So yes, it may be a defect under the Home Building Act, not as per the plans and specs, but it wasn't negligent. So it's very different glasses you put on when you look at that negligence. One where the waterproofer got in trouble, builder said, don't put the water stop angle into the bathroom. The tiler's going to do it so he gets the height right. So that waterproof is negligent. That membrane was never going to work. Moisture gets into the screed, it was going to pump straight out of the bathroom. So it's really do what you know is to be right. So if you're told something that's not right and you know it's not right, don't do it because you're on the hook for negligence. What would a reasonably competent person in that situation have done? Did that result in an economic loss? Then it's negligence. Common one I'm seeing for waterproofers again is fallout membrane layer. The lawyers are trying to sue everyone on the 2010 standard because litigation's always years later. So we're on still 2019, 2016 BCA, 2010 3740. Membrane didn't require fall back then. So it wasn't the waterproofer's job to check falls because falls can be above membrane, in a screed, in a topping, in whatever. But under the new standard, when that comes into play, it's in the standard the membrane requires fall on it. So that's why I'd say those document recording programs are crucial. Wherever people can give me sign-offs, I've got jobs where they've given me days old reports. I then have x-ray vision. I know what was actually done. It makes my life so much easier defending competent work. So yes, the defect may still occur, but if you weren't negligent, you did something. Somebody else may have done something after. You know, good documentation. I can say, no, here's the photographs. It had thickness. It had the right upturns. It complied. Yes, there's still a technical breach, but if there's no loss and no negligence, you may be able to get out of it. So that's really, I'll leave it there. It's just such a wide net they're casting. They're going after everybody. The amount of matters they've got 20 parties. And I've got one, I was engaged here, rejected they didn't want me there because the insurer stepped in. Now I've gone in for that party and it's a mess. It's an absolute mess and the lawyers are making lots of money and everyone's personally liable. Sorry, but the lawyers do. I do too, so I'm in the same boat. But yeah, so that's it. Any questions, come see me afterwards. Watch this space. So watch that negligence. Don't do the wrong thing. Document everything. Cheers. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, and thank you for such a strong wrap-up there. Stan, I think we should all finish on that note, other than to just say thank you for everyone that organised tonight. George, Nicholas, Kamal, Ron, George, Dari, JP on the AV tonight, so thank you for that and everyone else that helped prepare. And most of all, thank you for you guys that have come here to be better. So look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks. Oh, just one more thing, guys, just as a little bit of a snapshot into the future for next month. We only got 2 more events left for the year. Next month is going to be hosted by GCP, and then the following one after that is going to be just a year-end party. So rather than me, Kamal and Paul, do you want to talk about what you've got planned for next month? No? It'll just... Say it out loud, mate. Just real quick one. I don't want to hold everyone up.
Just hosting. Calm down. I am standing. Just GCP will be hosting next month's AIW meeting. It'll be at our Ingleburn facility. Everyone's invited. We'll be doing a presentation and a demonstration on polyurea spray membrane with new robot technology. So everyone is more than welcome to come. I think we're putting on a pizza truck. So.
That sounds great. Can we do the thing where we polyurea a watermelon and then try and sledgehammer?
No, we did ask. He doesn't particularly want to do that in case it doesn't work. But no, we do have a few things to do. We'll be waterproofing a block wall and taking to it with a hammer, and we'll have a couple of different things that we're looking at doing. So make it gimmicky for you. Waterproof water and then stand on it.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Get out of here. We'll see you next time.